Margaret held Lily's wedding bouquet tightly, her knuckles white. The soft scent of roses filled the room, but her thoughts were far from floral. Her grip tightened unconsciously. The petals brushed against her thumb, but all she could feel was dread creeping up her spine. She wandered through the wedding hall, surrounded by elegance and calm. But her mind was a storm, whispering truths she couldn't ignore. The phone buzzed again. Her chest tightened as she saw the caller ID. She didn't know the number, but something in her gut already did. "Hello?" she asked, voice low. The man responded calmly. "Detective Michael Rodriguez. I believe I've found the family of a girl who vanished 20 years ago." Margaret held Lily's wedding bouquet tightly, her knuckles white. The soft scent of roses filled the room, but her thoughts were far from floral. She stepped out into the crisp air. The detective's voice echoed, "She may not remember, but someone else does. We're close." She ended the call without a word. For a long moment, she just stood there, unable to breathe, eyes wide as realization settled in. Oh God, it's happening. The weight of everything she had buried for 20 years pressed down like a tidal wave. She paused in front of the photo. Lily's young face smiled at her, a lie frozen in time. A beautiful, necessary lie. 48 hours, that's all she had. 2 days to choose between confessing or letting it all explode without warning. Every second screamed louder. Each tick was a reminder that time no longer worked in her favor. It was a countdown now. There she was, Lily, joyful and radiant, exactly as she deserved to be. Margaret bit her lip, knowing everything could be ripped away. They looked perfect together. Margaret's heart cracked with guilt. They had no idea their foundation was built on her greatest sin. She passed the empty dressing room and froze. The fallen veil felt symbolic, like innocence slipping away in silence. She knelt before the altar, trembling, desperate. Her prayers weren't elegant, just raw, pleading thoughts thrown into the void. He had known her for years, and he had never seen her look so fragile. He took a seat beside her, letting the silence speak first. "I've done something terrible," she whispered, "and now I don't know how to stop the damage from spreading. You saved her, Margaret, but you also lied. Now you must choose which story lives after the altar, the truth or the secret." She re-entered the venue, her face composed but hollow. The celebration continued around her, and Margaret walked back into it, carrying everything alone. The storm had come out of nowhere, drenching the roads of Route 1 and turning every mile into a blur of headlights and shadow. Margaret gripped the wheel with both hands, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. She had worked late and was exhausted, her mind running through the list of tasks for the next day. The radio crackled. Thunder rolled above, but even the chaos of the storm couldn't prepare her for what was about to appear in her path. Her headlights lit up a twisted mess of metal just off the shoulder. A car was upside down, steam rising from the engine, broken glass reflecting the storm. Margaret slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against wet asphalt. Her chest tightened. As she opened the door and stepped into the rain, she sprinted toward the wreckage, heart pounding, terrified of what she might find. The smell of oil and smoke filled her lungs as she called out, "Hello, is anyone in there?" Crouching beside the shattered passenger window, Margaret's breath caught. There, barely visible in the dark interior, was a young girl, maybe 8, slumped sideways in the seat. Blood streaked her forehead, and her eyes were closed. Margaret reached for the handle and yanked, but it was stuck. Desperation surged. Lightning cracked, illuminating the child's face for an instant. Alone, injured. Margaret pounded the glass once, then twice. This child needed help, and fast. She finally managed to force the passenger door open and unfasten the seatbelt. The girl was light in her arms but worryingly limp. Margaret's clothes clung to her as she stumbled back to her own car, shielding the child from the downpour. The thunder roared overhead. She had no plan, just instinct. Gently, she laid the girl in the back seat and closed the door. Climbing behind the wheel again, she whispered, "Hold on, sweetheart. I've got you. You're safe now. I won't leave you." The hospital lights felt blinding after the darkness of the storm. Margaret burst through the doors, soaked to the bone, cradling the unconscious girl. "Car accident, Route 1, she shouted. A nurse rushed forward and took the child from her arms while others prepared a gurney. "Are you family?" someone asked quickly. Margaret hesitated. "I'm her aunt," she heard herself say. The words slipped out without thought, but as soon as she said them, something inside her shifted permanently. The waiting room was sterile and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos inside her mind. Margaret sat motionless in the plastic chair, water dripping from her sleeves onto the linoleum floor. She couldn't stop shaking. The image of the girl's bloody face haunted her. Why had she lied? She told herself it was panic, but it felt like something deeper. Hours passed, but no police came. No one asked for ID. She felt invisible, responsible, and strangely bound to the little girl behind that wall. When the nurse returned, Margaret stood up too quickly. "She's stable," the nurse said gently. "Mild head trauma. She's still unconscious, and she hasn't spoken since arriving." Margaret asked if anyone had come forward. The nurse shook her head. "No ID, no reports, no missing child alert matching her description. We contacted child services." Margaret froze. The girl was going to be placed in the system, lost in red tape and foster homes. unless someone claimed her. From behind the glass, Margaret watched the girl lie motionless in the hospital bed. Her small body looked fragile, her skin pale under the sterile lights, and the fourth dripped slowly into her arm. Beeping monitors blinked quietly. Margaret's hand touched the glass, her heart heavy. She didn't know the girl's name, didn't know where she came from, but she couldn't bear the thought of her waking up alone, afraid, and handed to strangers. Something deep inside her refused to allow that. The social worker spoke calmly but firmly. If no legal guardian comes forward, the child will enter state care. Margaret nodded slowly, her throat tight. We've had situations like this before. Sometimes families show up days later, but if they don't, the words trailed off. Margaret barely heard the rest. The forms on the desk seemed to glare at her. This child was about to vanish into bureaucracy. Her lie could end right here, or she could make it permanent. Choice loomed. The hospital parking lot was empty, dim, the storm long gone. Margaret sat in her car with the heater humming faintly. The forms from the hospital were still in her lap. Fields marked name, guardian, family history sat blank, waiting. She stared at them for a long time, heart pounding. She needs someone, she murmured. I can be someone. Her fingers gripped the pen. The moment she wrote Lily Chen, something irreversible happened. She wasn't saving her, she was claiming her. The kitchen was quiet, shadows pooling under the lamp as Margaret leaned over a stack of forged documents. Birth certificates, enrollment papers, vaccination records, every blank field filled with steady, trembling hands. Lily Chen, she whispered as she signed. Lie was now official, a full identity built from memory and desperation. She placed the pen down, staring at the name. Not just a forgery, a future, and she would protect it no matter what it cost her. Margaret moved from shelf to shelf, packing the remains of a life she was about to leave behind. The girl sat motionless on the couch, silent and observant, her small fingers clinging to the worn teddy bear Margaret had given her at the hospital. Every so often, Margaret glanced over, offering a smile. The child said nothing, but her eyes never left Margaret. There was no name exchanged yet, only this quiet bond between two people whose lives had collided by accident or fate. Their new street was lined with identical houses and birdless trees. Margaret exhaled as she pulled into the driveway. In the passenger seat, the girl watched the unfamiliar world unfold through the window, unreadable. Behind them, the moving truck slowed to a stop. We're home, Margaret said gently. It wasn't true, not yet, but maybe it could be. No one here would question them. In this town, they could start again. Margaret just had to make the lie feel like truth. The bedroom had been prepared with care. Pastel curtains, shelves of storybooks, a bed with a pink comforter. Margaret opened boxes and handed over toys one by one. The girl said nothing, but she moved closer, helping place a stuffed rabbit on the pillow. This is yours, Margaret said. A nod came in return. No protest, no questions, just acceptance. As they organized the drawers, Margaret noticed how natural it felt, as if they had always shared this space, this rhythm. The smell of vanilla filled the air, as Margaret and the girl leaned over a mixing bowl, sleeves rolled up, faces dusted with flour. The girl giggled as Margaret made a silly face, holding up dough-covered fingers. That means you're doing it right, Margaret said. It was the first time she'd heard her laugh. A real laugh. The kitchen, once a place of solitude, now echoed with something new. It wasn't just baking, it was building. Trust, joy, and perhaps even love. The school loomed larger than it should have. Margaret knelt to straighten the girl's collar. Remember, you're Lily now, she whispered. The girl gave a slight nod. Around them, parents chatted, children ran past. Margaret held her hand, until a teacher approached. You must be Lily, the woman smiled. The girl hesitated, then nodded again. Margaret let go reluctantly. Watching her disappear into the crowd was like watching her lie come alive and walk away on its own. 2 feet. The house had gone still. Margaret stood near the window, wrapped in silence, the faint sound of breathing from down the hall, the only sign of life. The girl Lily now was asleep. One hand curled around a stuffed animal. Margaret stared. Through the cracked door, torn between guilt and awe. She had stolen this child from the unknown, and yet she had given her warmth, safety, belonging. The truth haunted her, but what she had now felt too real to give up. Spring sunlight warmed their backs as they worked side by side in the garden. Margaret showed the girl how to dig a small trench. The girl mimicked her, cheeks smudged with dirt, fingers caked in soil. These will grow strong, Margaret said. Like you. The girl looked up at her, and for a moment, smiled, not shyly, but fully. Margaret smiled back, heart full. It didn't matter that they had no shared blood. They were sowing something real, day by day, root by root. Margaret turned the pages of a weathered photo album, pointing to strangers now repurposed as family. That's your uncle, she said. He loved to paint. The girl leaned in, fascinated. And this was your dad's cousin. He played the piano. Every lie was told with care, and the girl never questioned. She absorbed the stories, storing them like memories. Margaret knew she was creating fiction, but she clung to it. The girl needed roots, and Margaret needed to believe. Her own story. The girl nestled under the blanket, a picture book resting on her chest. Margaret sat at the edge of the bed, smoothing her hair gently. Will you stay until I fall asleep? The girl asked. Margaret nodded, her throat tight. Always. As the girl's eyes fluttered closed, Margaret remained still, the silence wrapping around them like a promise. This wasn't the life she planned, but it was the life she chose, one forged in secrecy, but growing more real with every quiet night. Years had passed, quietly but surely. Margaret stood at the edge of the doorway, watching the girl work through her math problems in focused silence. Her posture had grown confident, her voice steady when she spoke. A stack of textbooks and notebooks surrounded her, illuminated by the golden sunlight pouring in from the window. Margaret smiled faintly. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She had raised her to be bright, curious, and strong, and it was working.
From the window, Margaret spotted the taxi pull to a stop at the curb. Daniel stepped out, older now, more confident, with a suitcase in hand. She watched him scan the house with a small smile, the same expression he had as a boy, only now deeper. Inside, the girl continued working at the dining table, unaware of the arrival. Margaret took a deep breath. Her two worlds were about to collide. She wasn't sure she was ready, but the moment had already arrived. The front door opened with a creak. Daniel stepped in and dropped his bag, greeting his mother with a hug. Behind her, the girl appeared quietly at the edge of the hallway. She looked at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You must be Daniel," she said softly. He smiled. "And you must be Lily." They shook hands. Margaret stood back, watching every detail, the ease in their smiles, the possibility forming in real time. Her stomach tightened, and she didn't know why. Dinner had come and gone, but the conversation lingered. Daniel and the girl sat at the table, laughing over stories about school and favorite movies. Their voices blended with the clinking of forks and the creak of old chairs. Margaret stood by the sink, drying dishes that didn't need drying, her eyes fixed on them. The way they leaned toward each other, casual but connected, sent a ripple of unease through her. It was innocent, but it was also unmistakable. It started as a walk. Something light, something ordinary. They strolled through the local park, ice cream in hand, chatting about college, music, and books. The girl laughed more freely than Margaret had heard in years. Daniel listened intently, nodding, adding a joke here and there. In the distance, on a bench beneath the trees, Margaret watched them, unreadable. What had she expected? She had given them a shared life. But perhaps they were writing one of their own. The sun slipped behind the horizon, washing the porch in gold and lavender. Margaret sat with her tea growing cold in her hands. Inside, she could hear their laughter, warm, easy, familiar. It should have brought her peace. But something deeper stirred. A fear she couldn't name. She had made every decision to give that girl a better life. Now that life was expanding, and she was no longer the center of it. She was proud. But she was also scared to lose what she had built. They sat close on the couch, a thick textbook spread open between them. "Children's bones heal faster than adults," the girl said, pointing to a labeled skeleton. Margaret nodded. "That's why I want to help kids. Like me." The words came casually, but Margaret flinched inside. The girl didn't know how literal that connection was. "You'll make a wonderful doctor," she replied, forcing a smile. The truth pressed behind her eyes. She had shaped this future, but with stolen clay. The plastic stethoscope rested over Margaret's heart as the girl leaned in, pretending to diagnose her. "Rapid pulse. High stress," she announced. Margaret laughed. "Sounds accurate." They sat on the living room rug, sun painting streaks across the floor. It was all pretend, but it felt real, real enough to forget the cracks beneath it. Margaret pulled the toy gently away. "You're a natural." The girl smiled brightly. And Margaret swallowed the guilt that came with loving a lie this much. "She's different," Daniel said. "Smart. Funny. She sees people." Margaret looked straight ahead. "Yes, she does." He paused, then asked, "Is it wrong that I like her?" Margaret's heart jumped. "She's not your sister," she said carefully. "Not by blood." Silence followed. Daniel didn't answer, and Margaret didn't push. The truth stayed buried a little longer, but the edges were beginning to show. And once they surfaced, nothing could be put back the way it was. The photo was old, faded around the edges, a snapshot of a child smiling up at the camera, unaware of the secrets surrounding her. Margaret held it in her hands, fingers shaking slightly. She traced the outline of the girl's face before slipping it back into the drawer. She couldn't undo the lie. Couldn't unraise the child. The past echoed in every corner of this house. And if the truth ever came to light, she feared what it would take with it, including the family she had created. The dream came suddenly, dragging Lily from sleep like a scream in the dark. She sat up, breathless, her hand gripping the blanket tightly. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't remember why. Images flickered in her mind, flashing lights, broken glass, the distant sound of a woman crying. And something else, a melody, soft and unfamiliar, sung in a language she didn't recognize. She pressed her hands to her face. It felt too real. Too close. Like something long buried trying to surface. The next morning, Lily sat motionless at the kitchen table, her coffee untouched. She traced a line on the table's edge with one finger, eyes distant. Margaret entered, cheerful as usual, but paused when she saw her. "Didn't sleep well?" she asked. Lily nodded slowly. "I had a dream. It felt different." Margaret's smile froze. "Different how?" Lily hesitated. There was a smell. Like incense. And a voice, singing something soft. Like a lullaby. Margaret's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice calm. "I think it was Chinese," Lily said, watching Margaret closely. "The song. I couldn't understand the words, but it felt familiar." Margaret stirred the eggs a bit too hard. "You probably heard it in a movie," she replied quickly. Lily frowned. "No. It was more personal." Margaret turned, masking her panic with a gentle smile. "Dreams are strange like that. Your brain makes things up." But inside, she was unraveling. 20 years of silence, and now it was cracking. During her lunch break, Lily scrolled through a playlist of international lullabies, earbud in one ear. She clicked one labeled Mandarin traditional. As the soft melody played, she froze. A chill ran through her. This was it. The rhythm, the tone. Not identical, but close. Her fingers trembled slightly. Why would something so specific echo in her dreams? She didn't speak Mandarin. At least, she didn't think she did. She stared out the window, trying to remember something that had no shape. "Did you ever sing to me in Chinese?" Lily asked without warning. Margaret looked up from her book, startled. "What? A song? A lullaby? Something soft and sad? I think it's in Mandarin." Margaret blinked. "No. Never." "Why?" Lily hesitated. "I heard it in a dream. And when I played it back, it felt like I'd heard it before." Margaret closed the book gently, forcing herself not to react. "Sweetheart, dreams borrow things. Maybe from a neighbor or something at school when you were little." But her voice was too calm, too practiced. Later that night, Margaret stood before the mirror, her hands gripping the sink like it might anchor her to reality. Her reflection stared back, lined with guilt and exhaustion. She hadn't thought this would happen, not after so long. The memories were supposed to be gone. The child she rescued, renamed, and raised had been happy. Whole. But something from before was breaking through. "Please," she whispered to her own reflection. "Please let it stop." But it wouldn't. She could feel it coming. Lily opened a storage box in her closet, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside were old notebooks, school photos, drawings. She pulled out a crayon sketch of what looked like a woman in a red dress, long black hair, and a necklace of beads. Another drawing showed a curved temple roof and lanterns. None of them made sense. She didn't remember drawing these. "Did I ever go to a Chinese festival?" she asked aloud, but no answer came. Only the growing certainty that something was wrong. "Did I ever have night terrors as a kid?" Lily asked. They sat on the porch, watching the sky darken. Margaret nodded slowly. "You did. For the first year, especially." But they stopped. Lily looked down. "Did I ever talk in my sleep? Say names?" Margaret's jaw tensed. "Sometimes. But nothing that made sense." Lily turned to her. "You tell me if there was something I forgot, right?" Margaret met her gaze and forced a smile. "Of course." But every lie came harder now. "I think she's remembering," Margaret said. Pastor William listened quietly, fingers steepled under his chin. Not clearly. But fragments. She took a breath. "A song. A smell. Images." He nodded solemnly. "Memory is strange. And persistent." Margaret's eyes welled up. "I thought I'd buried it. I thought I'd raised her far enough from it that it wouldn't reach her." William leaned forward. "Margaret, the soul always remembers what the mind forgets. You know what you have to do." But she shook her head. "Not yet." The room was quiet, but Lily couldn't sleep. Her eyes stared at the ceiling, mind spinning. Flash. Metal crumpling. Rain. A woman crying out. Her hand reached unconsciously for her chest. The same melody echoed again in her head, soft, distant, but clear. It wrapped around her like a thread pulling her backward. She didn't understand it, but it felt like truth, like something that had been waiting for her to listen. She exhaled slowly. Who was I before I became me? The room erupted in applause the moment Daniel dropped to one knee. Candles flickered, wine glasses clinked, and Lily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Lily Chan, Daniel said, voice trembling slightly, will you marry me? Her eyes filled with tears. Margaret stood behind them, a practiced smile on her face, her hands gripping the back of a chair. Everyone leaned in, breath held. Lily whispered, yes. Cheers filled the room. And Margaret's world quietly cracked beneath the surface. The kitchen was empty, lit only by the soft glow of under-cabinet lights. Margaret stood motionless, her hands flat on the counter, breathing slowly through her nose. From the dining room, the sound of laughter, Lily's voice, Daniel's chuckle, clinking glasses, rang out like distant bells. Her chest ached. The scene had played out beautifully. The kind everyone dreams of. But Margaret knew what they didn't. And the weight of that secret pressed harder with every passing moment. The music played low, a love song echoing softly through the room. Lily and Daniel swayed gently in the center, their eyes locked. Friends circled around them, capturing videos, clapping lightly. Margaret stood at the edge of the room, her smile glued in place. Her hands were clenched in front of her, the blood nearly drained from her fingers. They looked so perfect. So right. But she couldn't stop thinking, what happens when Lily learns who she really is? Outside, the air was cool and still. Margaret sat on the porch steps, a half-empty wine glass dangling from her hand. She stared at nothing. Inside, the party was winding down, but she couldn't face another round of congratulations. Her thoughts circled in a loop, this isn't right. She has to know. But the moment she tells the truth, everything ends. Her family, her peace, the life she had built. She sipped the wine slowly, tasting nothing, wishing someone else could decide for her. The next morning, Margaret sat in the empty church sanctuary, sunlight pouring through stained glass, painting colors across the pews. Her head was bowed, hands clasped tight. She didn't pray, not really. She just sat in silence, trying to breathe. Footsteps echoed softly. Pastor William approached, his presence calm as always. He placed a hand on her shoulder. You've been here since dawn, he said gently. Margaret nodded, eyes wet. I don't know what to do anymore, she whispered. I lied to her, Margaret said, voice low. Not once. For 20 years. I built her life on something that didn't belong to me. Pastor William sat beside her, hands folded. You saved her, he said calmly. And then I kept her, Margaret replied, tears rising. And now they're engaged. And I'm her mistake. The word landed like a stone between them. William turned to her. You may have started this with fear. But what you gave her was love. Don't forget that when the truth comes. I was thinking navy blue for the groomsmen, Lily said, flipping through a notebook filled with notes and clippings. Margaret nodded, her eyes not really focusing. Sounds lovely, she said. Lily kept talking, flowers, venues, music. But Margaret barely heard her. Every word Lily spoke added another brick to the wall Margaret had to tear down. How could she tell her now? When everything was so full of light. She couldn't speak. She could only nod and fake the smile she used to mean. She stared at her reflection, makeup perfect, dress ironed, pearls in place, the image of grace and control. But her eyes betrayed her. Behind them, a storm raged. She gripped the sink tightly, her knuckles white. You have to tell her, she whispered. You have to. Her throat closed around the words. What if Lily looked at her differently? What if Daniel never forgave her? What if love wasn't enough? Margaret shut her eyes. It would ruin everything. But so would silence. They sat on the garden bench, quiet at first. I look at her and I see my whole life, Margaret said. She made me whole again. And now I might lose her. Pastor William looked ahead, hands resting on his knees. Then tell her the truth, not to protect yourself, but to give her the right to love you anyway. Margaret turned to him. And if she doesn't? William's gaze was steady. Then you face the consequence with dignity. Because truth, Margaret, is what love deserves. From the patio, Margaret watched them. Lily threw her head back laughing as Daniel lifted her off the ground in a playful spin. They looked happy. Unbreakable. She wanted to freeze time, to preserve this version of them, untouched by the truth. But it was already too late. The lie pulsed beneath every moment, every smile. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself. She would have to choose, honesty or silence. But either way, the wedding would never be the same again. When Margaret opened the door, the man standing there was unfamiliar but official. Tall, composed, mustache trimmed, dark eyes alert. "Miss Thompson?" he asked politely. "Detective Rodriguez. Private investigator." He held up a leather folder, not yet open. Margaret's chest tightened. "May I have a few minutes of your time?" She nodded slowly, stepping aside, masking the dread rising in her throat. Something told her, before he even sat down, that everything was about to change. They sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of a wall clock the only sound. Rodriguez placed the folder gently on the table. "I'm working a missing persons case," he began. "From 2005. A girl, Asian descent, around 8 years old. Disappeared after a car accident along Route 1. Margaret's hands gripped her knees under the table. "That was a long time ago," she said carefully. "Yes," he replied, flipping the folder open. "But not forgotten. Her mother never stopped looking." Rodriguez slid a sheet of paper across the coffee table. Margaret didn't want to look, but her eyes betrayed her. The image showed a child's face blended into that of a young woman. The resemblance was unmistakable. It was Lily. Not maybe. Not close. Lily. Rodriguez watched her reaction. "Recognize her?" he asked. Margaret stared at the image in silence for 3 long seconds, then shook her head slowly. "No. I'm sorry. I've never seen her before in my life." Rodriguez didn't press. He closed the folder calmly and rose to his feet. "Sometimes memories come back later," he said casually. "In case anything surfaces, I'll leave my card." Margaret nodded stiffly, hands behind her back. Outside, the world looked unchanged. Birds flew by, a car drove past. But inside her, panic twisted like wire. As he stepped toward the door, she glanced once more at the photo left face down. The lie she buried was now breathing air again. As soon as the door clicked shut, Margaret turned the lock and rested her forehead against the wood. Her breath came in short bursts. It had finally happened. After all these years, someone had come looking, and it wasn't just anyone. It was someone with a photo, a name, and the quiet patience of truth. She slid down until she sat on the floor, back against the door, eyes wide open. Her hands trembled as she whispered to no one, "Please don't take her from me." She stood in the kitchen, the card resting on the counter like a ticking bomb. Michael Rodriguez, private investigator. A number. A name. No context. Margaret picked it up, turned it over, placed it back down. Her phone was in her hand, thumb hovering over the keypad. She considered calling him, telling him it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But what could she say? Every word would trap her deeper. She dropped the card into a drawer and slammed it shut. Out of sight. Not out of mind. In the backyard, Lily knelt in the dirt, planting herbs along the fence, her movements calm and content. Margaret watched through the kitchen window, arms crossed, face pale. The reflection in the glass showed the split, her daughter's joy, and her own dread staring back. Margaret whispered to herself, "She doesn't know. She can't know." But the image from the folder had Lily's face. There was no denying it now. The past wasn't lost. It had just taken a while to catch up. She held the card like it might vanish if she let go. The room was silent except for the buzz of the bedside lamp. Margaret stared at the number. Her thumb hovered over her phone again. She could call him, confess, explain, try to frame it as an act of compassion. Or she could do nothing and hope he didn't come back. But hope felt dangerous now. Everything was closing in, and the silence she'd relied on for 2 decades was becoming impossible to defend. The attic was hot and full of dust. Margaret sat on the floor, boxes open around her, fingers brushing through photos, birthdays, holidays, scraped knees and sleepy mornings. Then she found it, Lily at maybe 9, grinning with cake frosting on her face. A memory so vivid it hurt. She touched the photo lightly. "You were mine," she whispered. Even if no one else knew it. The tears came suddenly, without control. She had saved her. But now the world wanted to take her back. Margaret stood in front of the fireplace, the photo from the folder clenched in her hand. She stared at it one last time before dropping it into the flames. It curled instantly, edges blackening, Lily's imagined face disappearing in smoke. But Margaret knew the truth wasn't that easy to destroy. The real copy still existed. The real detective was still out there. and the real past was waking up. Still, as the paper vanished into ash, she told herself, not yet. They can't take her, not yet. Who's Michael Rodriguez? Lily asked, holding up the card. Margaret turned from the sink, her expression betraying a flicker of panic before she recovered. Where did you find that? She asked too quickly. Drawer by the fridge, Lily replied. It looked official. Margaret wiped her hands with a towel. Oh, he's investigating an old neighbor's case. Nothing serious. Lily studied her for a moment. Why would he leave his card here? Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. Just being thorough. I googled him, Lily said. He specializes in missing persons. Margaret's throat tightened. He mentioned that, yes, she said evenly. But it has nothing to do with us. Lily tilted her head. Then why did he come to you? Margaret took a long sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. He's looking for someone who used to live nearby. I told him I didn't know anything. Lily narrowed her eyes. You sure? Margaret forced a steady gaze. Positive. But her pulse betrayed her. Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, several photo albums open around her. At first, the images were comforting, birthdays, holidays, school plays. But as she looked closer, something felt off. There were no baby photos. Nothing before age 8 or 9. Every early memory was conveniently vague. Grandma, she called out, where are my baby pictures? No answer. Lily's fingers hesitated over a photo of her and Margaret at a park. She looked happy. But the story behind it was unraveling. Margaret appeared at the door, her voice gentle but guarded. Looking through old memories? Lily didn't look up. Trying to find some. Margaret walked in slowly. You've seen these before. Lily turned a page. Yeah, but they all start when I was 8. Margaret paused, then said, that's when you came to live with me. After my parents died in that accident? Lily asked. Margaret nodded. Yes. Lily stared at her. Can I see their photos? Margaret's silence answered for her. Digging deeper, Lily found something unusual, a partially burned piece of paper tucked beneath loose files. The edge showed what might have been a child's face, distorted by flame. She held it carefully. Margaret stepped into the room, immediately noticing. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice too sharp. In the filing cabinet, Lily replied, not looking up. Why was it burned? Margaret forced a breath. It was an accident. Old documents. Nothing important. But Lily didn't believe her. Lily walked along the sidewalk, phone in hand, the cool air biting at her skin. Her search history had grown in strange directions. Asian girl missing 2005. Route 1 accident child survivor, progression photo database. Each result was a door she didn't know if she wanted to open. One article mentioned a case still unsolved, a girl never claimed after a crash. Lily's breath caught. Her fingers hovered over the screen. The year. The location. The age. All matched. It couldn't be coincidence. Margaret sat in the dark, the television off, the house silent. The only thing in her hands was the business card, now creased from being turned over too many times. Her thoughts raced. Lily had seen it. Lily was asking questions. And Margaret was running out of answers. She whispered to herself, you waited too long. If Rodriguez came back, if Helen ever showed up, it would all collapse. She had always feared the truth. Now she feared her silence even more. Tell me the truth, Lily said, holding up both the photo scrap and the card. Margaret stood at the end of the hallway, caught between retreat and confrontation. Lily, she began. Don't lie to me, Lily said. What aren't you telling me? Margaret's lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. Was I adopted? Lily asked. Was any of it true? The hallway stretched between them like a canyon. Margaret stepped forward, but still said nothing. That silence was louder than a scream. The door was closed. The house was still. And Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. She had tried to control the narrative. Tried to protect Lily, and herself, by keeping the truth buried. But it was slipping now, thread by thread. Her lies weren't enough anymore. And the girl she had loved into adulthood was standing on the edge of the truth, demanding it. Margaret wept, alone, afraid, and aware. She couldn't outrun this much longer. Sleep didn't come. Lily lay still under the covers, eyes wide, heart heavy. In her mind, the images swirled, the edge of the burned photo, the investigator's name, Margaret's silence, the strange memories, the lullaby. Something didn't fit. Or maybe everything did, just not the version she was told. She stared at the ceiling, questions echoing louder than answers. And somewhere deep inside, she felt it, the certainty that her life had never belonged fully to her. And it never would until she uncovered why. Margaret opened the door to find Rodriguez once again on her porch, but this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman with tired eyes and a long scar trailing across her cheek. She clutched an envelope like it was sacred. "Miss Thompson," Rodriguez said gently. "This is Helen Jong. May we come in?" Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The woman stared at her with quiet desperation, as if hoping to recognize something. Margaret hesitated, then stepped aside. The past had just walked through her door. The silence was unbearable. Helen sat rigidly, hands clutched around the envelope in her lap. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "My daughter, Maylin, disappeared in 2005. She was in a car with my sister. There was an accident. I survived. She didn't." Margaret's throat closed. Helen looked up, eyes glassy. "But no one ever found Maylin's body. They told me she must have been thrown from the car, or drowned. But I never believed that. I knew, I still know, she's alive." Helen opened the envelope with reverence, as if afraid the photos might break apart. She laid them out one by one, a baby with straight black hair, a toddler in a pink jacket, a smiling child holding chopsticks. "This is her," Helen whispered. "This is Maylin." Margaret's eyes locked onto the photos. The resemblance was undeniable. The girl in the pictures was Lily. Her Lily. She tried to speak but couldn't. The guilt hit her all at once, sharp, paralyzing. This wasn't theory. This was truth. Margaret retreated to the kitchen, her chest heaving. From the other room, she could hear Helen and Rodriguez speaking quietly, but their words blurred. She gripped the counter, knuckles white. The photographs had shattered her defenses. This woman wasn't delusional. She was a mother, one who had been searching, grieving, enduring. And Margaret had taken the one thing that gave her life meaning. She had convinced herself it was mercy. But standing in that kitchen, she began to doubt everything. She used to hum this little song, Helen said, voice breaking. "I still sing it sometimes. It's all I have of her." She held a photo to her chest like a talisman. Rodriguez said nothing, letting the silence speak for them. Margaret stood at the edge of the room, frozen. She watched Helen's pain unfold like a slow unraveling, raw, unfiltered, unbearable. This wasn't an accusation. It was a plea. A mother still searching, still hoping. And Margaret felt something inside her finally fracture. "I'm sorry you've been through so much," Margaret said, sitting carefully across from Helen. Her voice was composed, but hollow. "Have you found any solid leads over the years?" Helen shook her head. "Only false hope. Until now." Someone online shared a photo of a young doctor volunteering at a children's hospital. She looked exactly like Maylin would today. Same eyes. Same smile. Margaret's stomach turned. She already knew which photo it was, and when it was taken. Her silence screamed in her ears. Helen handed Margaret her phone. On the screen was a familiar image, Lily in her white coat, smiling as she crouched beside a group of children during an outreach clinic. "I knew right away," Helen said. "I printed it, traced it over my baby's face, checked every feature." Margaret stared at the screen, numb. There was no use denying it. Anyone who saw that photo beside Helen's baby pictures would know. This wasn't a maybe. This was a match. A life taken. A truth avoided for too long. After Helen and Rodriguez left, Margaret wandered the hallway like a ghost. Her fingers brushed the edge of a framed photo of her, Lily, and Daniel, a perfect lie captured in ink. She stopped, staring at it, overwhelmed. She had tried to create something beautiful from tragedy. And for a long time, it had worked. But now the real story was crawling back into focus. The child she saved hadn't been lost. She had been taken. And no matter how she justified it, that truth wouldn't go away. The envelope still sat on the table. Margaret lit a small lamp and pulled out the photos once more. She studied each one slowly. Maylin crawling. Maylin learning to walk. Maylin in her mother's arms. They were beautiful. Full of life. Full of a story Margaret had erased. Her fingers trembled as she reached the final image, a blurry picture of a toddler wearing a red sweater. Margaret remembered that sweater. She hadn't bought it. But Lily, Maylin, had arrived wearing it. The street was empty, the lamplight soft and distant. Margaret stood by the window, unmoving. Her reflection stared back at her, older, worn, full of secrets. The visit had changed everything. There was no more room for denial. Helen was real. Her pain was real. And Lily's past was real too, no matter how hard Margaret had tried to rewrite it. She rested her forehead against the glass, eyes closed. The house around her felt quieter than ever. And heavier. Like it knew what she had done. The silence in the chapel was deep and forgiving. Margaret sat with her hands clenched, staring at the altar. Pastor William waited beside her, giving her space. "I need to confess something," she said finally, her voice small. He turned toward her, his eyes soft. "I took her," Margaret whispered. "I found her after the crash. She didn't remember anything. And I said she was my niece. I raised her like my own. I gave her a new name." Her voice cracked. "And now it's all falling apart." "You saved her," William said gently. "I stole her," Margaret replied. "There's a difference." She looked at him, eyes wet. "I didn't report it. I lied to everyone. For 20 years. William exhaled slowly, processing the weight of her words. "Does she know?" Margaret shook her head. "But someone found her real mother. She was here. She showed me pictures. It's her. There's no doubt." William paused, then spoke softly. "Then you have to tell her. Before someone else does." Margaret stood by the front steps, gripping her sweater tightly. She had gone over the speech a dozen times. She would tell Lily everything. The truth, finally. She heard the car door close and looked up. Lily was walking toward her, smiling from work, casual, unsuspecting. "Hey, Grandma," she said. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. "Hi, sweetheart," she replied instead. The moment passed, and the words collapsed again. Cowardice won. Again, she had tried to write it down. 3 pages. Then 10. Then no cards with bullet points. "I found you after the crash. I lied. I'm sorry." But none of it worked. None of it sounded like enough. The cards lay scattered on the bed, crumpled, torn. She walked in circles, whispering versions to herself. Each one ended the same way, in failure. What words could undo 2 decades? What apology could cover 20 years of stolen truth? Margaret paused at the hallway corner, hearing their voices from the living room. "She's been acting strange," Lily said. "Like, distracted, nervous." Daniel responded, "I noticed it too." "You think it's wedding stress?" "Maybe," Lily said, but her voice lacked conviction. Margaret leaned against the wall, eyes shut. They were beginning to notice. Her silence was no longer invisible. The lie she had built was starting to show its cracks. And those she loved were reading between the lines. She stood at the bedroom door, listening. Lily's voice on the phone, light laughter. She was happy, for now. Margaret raised her hand to knock. The moment stretched. One knock, and the truth would begin. But so would the pain. She lowered her hand. Then raised it again. Then stepped back entirely. Her feet couldn't decide what her heart already knew. She had to speak. But she wasn't ready. And she didn't know if she ever would be. "Mom," Daniel said, quietly but firmly. Margaret looked up from the sink. "You've been off lately. You okay?" She forced a smile. "Just tired. Too much on my plate." He nodded, unconvinced. "It's more than that. I know you. You're hiding something." Her back stiffened. "Daniel, don't start." "I'm not trying to pry," he said. "But if there's something going on, with Lily, with you, please don't carry it alone." She turned away. He didn't push. But she knew he was right. She was alone, and surrounded. "I failed," she said. "I waited too long. Now it's going to hurt more than it ever would have before." Pastor William didn't interrupt. Margaret continued, voice shaking. "She trusts me. She loves me. I raised her. And the moment I tell her, I become the villain. I become the one who stole her life." William placed a hand over hers. "Or the one who gives it back," he said. "Truth doesn't erase love, Margaret. It just asks it to stand up and prove itself." She cried harder, because she knew he was right. She had driven there. That was something. Margaret sat in the car, engine off, staring at the front entrance of the hospital. Staff came and went. Lily wasn't among them yet. Margaret rehearsed the speech again. Maybe here, at her workplace, Lily would be calm, composed. Or maybe she'd hate her forever. Her hand hovered over the door handle. Then dropped. Her courage failed. Again. She watched the building for another 10 minutes. Then drove away. Later that night, Lily emptied the kitchen trash and paused. A crumpled page among the coffee grounds and napkins caught her eye. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was Margaret's. The first line stopped her cold, "I found you after the accident." The next was crossed out. Another line said, "You were alone. I was scared too." Then, just the word, "forgive." Lily stared at it, heart pounding. She didn't understand. But she knew, something enormous was being hidden. And it had everything to do with her. The rehearsal was picture perfect. Guests mingled under white canopies, rows of folding chairs aligned with care. Lily and Daniel stood at the altar, practicing their vows with light-hearted laughter. Margaret stood off to the side, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. The afternoon sun warmed everything, but to her, the air felt heavy. She kept glancing at the entrance, heart racing, haunted by the note Lily had found. She hadn't asked about it yet. But Margaret knew that time was gone. She didn't belong to this world of rose petals and white lace, but Helen walked through it anyway. She paused at the edge of the crowd, clutching a small photograph in her hand. Her eyes scanned the guests, then froze. There, by the altar, her daughter. Older, elegant, radiant. But unmistakably Maylin. Her breath caught. Her hand trembled. She whispered the name aloud, tears already forming. And then, she moved forward, unable to stop herself, each step powered by years of grief and hope. Maylin? The name sliced through the ceremony like a blade. Guests turned. Murmurs erupted. Lily froze, turning toward the voice. A woman she didn't recognize was pushing through the crowd, eyes wide, face contorted in desperate joy. "Maylin," she cried again. Lily stepped back instinctively. I think you have the wrong person," she said, voice cracking. Helen reached her, stopping inches away. "No," she whispered. "It's you. I'd know you anywhere." And everyone around them fell silent. Margaret knew the moment had arrived. She stepped forward slowly, her legs trembling. All eyes turned to her, including Lily's. "Grandma?" Lily asked, confusion deepening. Margaret opened her mouth, but no sound came. Helen turned toward her. "You knew," she said bitterly. "You raised her. You lied to her." Margaret could only nod. The weight of 20 years collapsed in a single breath. "Tell me it's not true," Lily said softly. Margaret couldn't. And in that silence, everything shattered. "I don't understand," Lily said, shaking her head. "What is she talking about?" Helen stepped closer. "You're my daughter. Maylin Jong. You disappeared after a crash. I never stopped looking." Lily turned to Margaret, her eyes begging. "Tell me she's wrong." "Please," Margaret whispered, "she's not." Daniel rushed forward. "What's going on?" But no one answered him. Lily stumbled back, like the ground itself had shifted. "My name isn't Lily?" she asked. "What did you do to me?" "I saved you," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were alone. No one came. I couldn't let them take you into the system. I gave you a life. You gave me a lie," Lily said, her voice rising. "You made me think I belonged. But none of it was real." Margaret stepped forward, reaching out. "You are my family." "No," Lily snapped, stepping back. "You're not my grandmother. You're just someone who stole me." The words struck hard. Margaret's arms fell limp at her sides. Daniel moved to Lily's side, placing a protective arm around her. She didn't resist. The guests around them murmured in confusion and discomfort, unsure whether to stay or leave. Margaret stood alone in the center, her heart crumbling with every glance thrown her way. "I loved you," she said, her voice breaking. "Every single day." Lily looked at her with tears in her eyes. "Then you should have told me. You should have trusted me with my own story." Margaret had no defense left. Only sorrow. Helen stepped forward slowly. "I'm not here to take you away," she said gently. "I just wanted to see you. To know you're okay. To tell you that I never gave up." Lily looked at her, searching for familiarity, for something to cling to. But nothing came. "I don't remember you," she whispered. "I don't remember any of it." Helen nodded, her own voice tight. "But I remember everything. And I love you." Lily began to shake. "I don't know who I am anymore." And her knees buckled. Daniel moved quickly, catching Lily before she fell. Helen knelt beside her, stroking her hair with trembling hands. "It's okay," she whispered. "Breathe, Maylin." Lily looked between them, lost in a fog of disbelief. Margaret watched from across the garden, rooted to the ground. She wanted to run, to scream, to disappear, but she couldn't. Her world had fallen apart in front of everyone. The lie was gone. And all that remained was the wreckage of what she had built. The guests had mostly dispersed, whispering apologies in confusion as they left. Lily sat on a bench near the hedge, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Daniel sat beside her, silent, present. Margaret stood yards away, watching but not daring to approach. Helen remained behind them, quiet. Lily finally whispered, "Everything I believed was fake." Daniel responded, "But who you are, that's real. And I'm still here." Her eyes filled again. And still, Margaret didn't move. The room was quiet, filled only by the ticking of a soft analog clock. Lily sat between the two women who had both called themselves her mother, one by birth, one by choice. Helen's hands rested tightly in her lap. Margaret sat stiffly, eyes lowered. Weeks of silence, tears, and missed calls had led to this moment. "I don't know where to start," Lily finally said. Her voice was steady, but fragile. "Then let's start with the truth," the therapist suggested. And the conversation began. "I hated you," Helen said softly, eyes locked on Margaret. "For stealing her. For living the life that should have been mine. But then I watched her. The way she stands, the way she smiles. And I saw something else." Margaret stayed silent, listening. Helen's voice cracked. "You raised her. You loved her. That doesn't erase what you did. But it matters." Margaret's eyes welled up. "I never meant to hurt you. I just couldn't let her go." For the first time, Helen nodded. "I know, I don't remember you," Lily said to Helen, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not really. But when I look at you, something in me aches, like a memory that doesn't have a picture." Helen smiled, tearfully. "That's okay. We have time." Lily turned to Margaret. "And you lied to me. But you also made me who I am. That's real too." Margaret reached for her hand. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I've never been sorrier in my life." Lily hesitated, then didn't pull away. It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it was something. Daniel stood as the door opened. Lily stepped out first, her shoulders slumped, eyes tired. He opened his arms without a word. She walked into them, letting herself breathe for the first time in hours. "How'd it go?" he asked softly. "Messy," she said. "But honest." He kissed the top of her head. "Then it's a start." She closed her eyes and let the silence say the rest. In that moment, she didn't feel whole. But she felt held. And that, for now, was enough. Spring brought slow healing. Lily and Helen walked together through the park, the same one where Lily had once laughed with Margaret. Now, step by step, a new bond formed. "You hated vegetables," Helen said, laughing. "You used to spit out broccoli like it was poison," Lily chuckled. "Still do." They exchanged glances, cautious, hopeful. Lily didn't call her mom. Not yet. But she asked questions, listened to stories, opened space for something new. It wasn't restoration. It was reconstruction. They sat in the backyard, mugs warm in their hands, the air golden with sunset. "You don't have to say anything," Margaret said. "I'm just grateful you're here." Lily looked at her. "I have questions. Still. But I also have memories. Ones you gave me. Ones I treasure." Margaret blinked back tears. "You're everything to me." Lily nodded slowly. "And you'll always be part of my story. Even the broken chapters." Margaret smiled, for the first time in weeks, without guilt. "Okay," Lily said, opening her wedding planner. "You both get to help, no fighting." Margaret and Helen exchanged an amused glance. "I'll handle flowers," Helen offered. "Music's mine," Margaret said. Lily grinned. "Deal." Around the table, the mood was light, surprisingly easy. It didn't erase what happened. But for once, it wasn't about blame. It was about building something, a ceremony not just of love, but of choosing each other again, in the open, with truth at the center. The day had finally come. A crisp breeze stirred petals along the walkway as guests arrived, greeted by string music in blooming arches. In the bridal room, Lily adjusted her earrings in the mirror, breathing deeply. Margaret stood nearby, offering a tissue when her hands trembled. "You ready?" Daniel called from the hallway. "Not even close," Lily laughed. But she was. She was ready not because it was perfect, but because it was real. She had found her place. And her people. No one expected it, but it felt right. Lily walked down the aisle with both women beside her, one on each arm. Helen wore a soft gray dress, elegant and understated. Margaret held a bouquet instead of a cane, a sign of presence, not age. Guests stood in silence, moved. This wasn't tradition. It was truth. Lily smiled through tears, and as they reached the altar, she kissed each woman's cheek. There were no perfect families. Only the ones we built from love, and the courage to rebuild when it breaks. The music swelled as Lily and Daniel danced under strings of lights. Around them, the reception shimmered with warmth. At a nearby table, Helen and Margaret sat side by side, not best friends, not enemies, but something in between. They watched the couple sway, the way Lily's face softened when she looked at Daniel. "We did something right," Margaret said quietly. Helen nodded. "We both did." And for the first time, they didn't feel like rivals. They felt like roots, different, but holding up the same tree. If this story touched you, if you've ever loved someone enough to fight for a second chance, then tell us, what would you have done in Margaret's place? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in the power of chosen family, hit like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs it. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy love. It proves it.